While fighting the Nazis in Italy, the Allies began plans to invade Europe. The plan was given the codename Operation Overlord, and the command of the operation was given to the Supreme Allied Commander, U.S. General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Over 3 million U.S., British, and Canadian troops assembled in Great Britain and prepared for the assault. Operation Overlord was given the codename D-Day. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces attacked the beaches of Normandy, France. Paratroopers dropped in behind enemy lines before dawn to secure key sites. Allied naval vessels at sea conducted a pre-dawn naval bombardment of the German defenses along the coast. At dawn, 3.5 million troops used amphibious landing craft to land under heavy German fire. Before the attack, the Allies had built a phony army as a diversion to distract the Germans and make them think they were landing in Calais. It worked. Hitler refused to send reinforcements to Normandy when the real attack commenced, making it easier for the Allies to successfully invade France. Once the invasion force rendezvoused in the English Channel, 5 different beaches were set as landing sites. US forces landed at Utah Beach and Omaha Beach. British forces landed at Gold and Sword Beaches, and the Canadians landed at Juno Beach.
Although the invasion of France was very successful, there were many costs associated with it. The Allies suffered an estimated 10,000 casualties at Normandy. By early July, the Allies had landed nearly 1 million troops and 180,000 vehicles in France. The tanks and supplies that landed would be the forces that would push into France and Germany and help to end the war. By August, General George S. Patton's Third Army had rolled into France. On August 25, 1944, US and French forces liberated Paris and drove the Nazis into retreat. By September of 1944, the Western Front had been ripped open, and Germany was in retreat.
By late 1944, the Germans were in full retreat heading east into Germany, and the Allies were right on their tail. It seemed as though the war had officially turned, and it was all but over. But it wasn't over yet. In fall of 1944, the Allies pushed east towards Germany, chasing the retreating Nazis. But on December 16, 1944, Hitler orders a last-ditch surprise attack. It would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge was the final German attack of World War II. The battle was named because of the bulge it created in the lines between the two armies. The Germans attacked the 101st Airborne and pinned them down near the town of Bastogne, Belgium. Caught in freezing temperatures without supplies and cut off from reinforcements, the 101st Airborne was in deep trouble. For 10 days, the 101st Airborne hung on while the Germans besieged them. They dug foxholes in the snow to protect themselves from the German shelling. They had no way to keep themselves warm, and they were under constant attack. Starving, surrounded, and outnumbered, it didn't look good. Then, on December 26, 1944, General George Patton and the Third Army rolled through the Argonne Forest. His tanks arrived and drove the Germans into the final retreat, relieving and resupplying the 101st Airborne. For the rest of the war, the German army would be moving backwards, and Hitler would never order another advance again.
By summer of 1944, Germany was retreating on all fronts. Soviets were driving into the German heartland in the east. Americans, the British, the French were pushing into the Reich into the west. But as they advanced, they found the horrors of the Holocaust. Allied troops liberated Nazi death camps on the western and eastern fronts. The Soviets were the first to find the atrocities of concentration camps in Poland. 6 million Jews were killed in mass executions in concentration camps. To cover up the evidence, Germans cremated and buried massive amounts of bodies. Prior to these discoveries, FDR had been reluctant to accept Jewish refugees to America. He allowed Jews of special merit, such as Albert Einstein and Robert Oppenheimer, to enter America, but denied the average refugee. The Holocaust was one of the most tragic atrocities in the history of the world. By February of 1945, the war was all but over. FDR, Churchill, and Stalin met at Yalta in the Soviet Union to discuss a plan for the war's end and peace. There are 3 main achievements of the meeting. Number 1, after the war, Germany would be divided into 4 military zones, occupied by the Allies. West Germany would be divided into 3 zones, occupied by the United States, Great Britain, and France. East Germany, the larger zone, would belong to the Soviet Union. The city of Berlin would also be split into 4 military zones, occupied by the same 4 countries. Number 2, Stalin would allow free, democratic elections in Poland and the rest of Eastern Europe. And number 3, the Soviets would declare war on Japan and aid the United States' fight in the Pacific.
But then, 2 months after the meeting at Yalta, an unexpected event occurred that could have changed the course of the war. While vacationing at his residence in Warm Springs, Georgia, Franklin Delano Roosevelt unexpectedly dies of a brain hemorrhage. FDR's loss was a loss for the ages. His sudden death was shocking, and it sank the nation into a deep despair. For most Americans, FDR was more than a leader. He was a fatherly figure and a friend. He helped guide them through 2 of the biggest crises in their lives, the Great Depression and now the Second World War. His death came at a critical time in the war, where the Axis were about to surrender. And now, with Roosevelt gone, America was to see the end of the war through with a new leader. Vice President Harry S. Truman was sworn in and became the 33rd President of the United States. Truman was quite the opposite of FDR. He was quiet meek, and he was only vice president for 2 months before FDR's death catapulted him into a position to lead the United States to victory in World War II. Even with FDR's death, the writing was on the wall for Hitler and Germany. By April 1945, German resistance had been defeated, and the Reich was done. On April 20th, 1945, a mere 8 days after the death of FDR, with the Soviets shelling Berlin and closing in all around him, Hitler and his top officials commit suicide in his bunker. Hitler's death caused desertions across the German army and forced Nazi forces to surrender on every front. Hitler and his wife, Eva Braun, retreated to their underground bunker, where Eva took a cyanide capsule and Hitler shot himself. He left instructions for his officers to burn their bodies after his death. His body was never found. Nonetheless, with Hitler gone and the Reich collapsing, Germany officially surrendered unconditionally to the Allies on May 7, 1945. The very next day, on May 8, 1945, the United States and the Allied powers declared VE Day, or Victory in Europe Day. This day officially ended the war in Europe. Celebrations rang out everywhere. Millions of Americans came out and filled Times Square. For those who had loved ones who were fighting the European front, they celebrated the fact that they would soon be home safe and sound. The United States had done it. Along with their allies in Europe, they had defeated Hitler and Mussolini. However, with this victory fresh in mind, most Americans remembered that the war in the Pacific still raged on against Japan. And while victory in Europe had been achieved, victory in the Pacific was still in doubt.
This is a solemn but glorious hour. I wish that Franklin D. Roosevelt had lived to see this day. General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe.